I come to the floor today to express my concern and my disappointment over the decision by the President to formally withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement.
Mid-December 2019, I interviewed Chairman of Emagine Entertainment, Paul Glantz. Emagine Theater's Royal Oak location has solar panels on the roof, and I wanted to ask Paul Glantz how these fit into the greater idea of sustainability. So, tell me about the solar panels.
Well, the reasoning behind it was both altruistic in terms of we thought that it was the right thing to do for the environment, but it was also, it made economic sense for us. Curtailing our cost of energy, of course, is good for our business, bottom line.
I asked Glantz if there was any ways he thought this could be made easier for other businesses, but he didn't seem like he was a big fan of government regulation.
I believe ultimately there should be market-based solutions, and business people will make investments that save energy when there's a return on it. You know, we're looking at things, for example, like paper straws. Now, they're 3 times as much as plastic straws right now, so we haven't quite pulled the trigger on that, but as those come down in price, you'll see us get away from plastic and go more toward recyclables and things of that nature.
Why solar power? What makes you choose solar?
Well, it made better sense than a windmill at the time.
While I packed up, Mr. Glantz and I talked about climate change specifically. He remains unconvinced.
And so it's not clear to me, notwithstanding what some very fervent scientists suggest, that the change in our climate is all man-made at this point in time. It could simply be part of a cycle.
The idea that climate change is just a natural cycle that the Earth goes through is a pretty common idea, despite extensive evidence on the contrary and a 97% consensus in papers written on climate. Either way, it was time for our roof tour. Ron described being up there like you're on an alien planet. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think our roof is interesting. I don't think it looks like an alien planet per se. I think it looks like lots of mirrors pointing toward toward another planet.
Being on the roof was one of those rare moments in which you feel like you can catch a little glimpse of the future. I imagined an entire city powered by these shiny blue panels. They glinted almost gold in the sunlight. Yeah, I've noticed they're definitely got quite the array up here. I spoke to Ron, an Emagine employee. Do you think stuff like this should be more common? Do you think we should be trying to reduce our footprint?
Without a doubt, yeah. You know, things like this, you know, wind energy, it just makes too much sense. You know, I mean, there's islands of plastic floating around in the ocean, for God's sake.
Paul Glantz's mention of market-based climate solutions stood out to me, but I'll get to that in a minute. After visiting Emagine, I reached out to Al Warner, a resident of Brighton, Michigan that made the paper for installing solar panels on the roof of his home. Mr. Warner, a retired engineer, spoke precisely and passionately over the course of our 22-minute video call, giving long detailed answers and occasionally getting sidetracked to give me things like the specifics of household energy configurations. To him, the climate problem was deeply personal. I remember thinking to myself, I wish everybody felt this way about the climate crisis.
People never tell the truth if lies are what pay their salary.
That's Warner on how difficult it is to get major corporations to admit they're part of the problem.
So the only way to change it is through our government. We had a Michigan proposition that was going to mandate constitutionally that our utilities use wind power, and it got voted down.
The Paris Climate Agreement was introduced as a solution to global climate change. The main goal of the Paris Agreement was to keep the increase in global average temperature below 2 Celsius. While the United States opted out of this agreement, many cities are choosing to adopt it anyways. Royal Oak is one such city, and I spoke to Mayor Michael Fournier about this.
When the opportunity came up to let our residents know and let the state of Michigan know and anybody else who cares to know what our values are, we took the opportunity and moved forward with, supporting the Paris Climate Accord. You know, the resistance out there is still challenging. I mean, there are still folks out there that deny climate, and then there are some that understand climate change is here, it's caused by man, but I really don't want to inconvenience myself. For example, everyone's about renewable energy until you put a windmill in their backyard, and then they're like, wait a minute.
Fournier was also against market-based solutions, defining corporations as mostly self-interested entities that can't be trusted to solve a problem like climate change, something so moral or something so global.
If you leave industry to regulate itself, what is the self-interest of a corporation? It's not a person. Its interest is to make as much money as possible. You know, in that context, you can't entrust like you can entrust your fellow citizens who are duly elected by their neighbors. I think when you think about climate change, it's, to leave it up to people that are profiting, or organizations that are profiting, to decide, what air you breathe or I breathe or our kids or our grandkids or great-grandkids will breathe is a very risky proposition.
While working on this project, I noticed those convinced that climate change was a real pressing issue were very concerned, almost frantic. Both Fournier and Warner had the foresight to worry about generations after them, and seemed to share the opinion that if you can't convince the corporate monoliths to see reason, you must force them to do the right thing. Candidates need to address the issue and compel change. If we don't tackle it now, you won't have to go to the movies to see the next disaster film.
When smoke carries over, when fires burn, when seas get overfished, when rainforest is destroyed in Brazil, all of these things systematically affect everybody else. So we, the people, get together and we write the rules. I believe the power resides in us, the people, not in corporations, not in the wealthy, but in us. And that's not socialistic, that's not anti-American, that's more American than any other concept that you can think of.